What is going on, guys? In today's video I will show you the best bleed blood mage build in Path of Exile 2 0.3 update. This build has been taking off in 0.3 because it completely flips the script on what you expect from a spellcaster. Instead of relying on elemental nukes or flashy crit chains, the blood mage thrives on turning its own life force into a weapon and using bleeding debuffs to grind enemies down. Every single cast has a weight and every channel will feel dangerous, and the payoff is absolutely insane. At the heart of this build is the unique staff, the Sanguine Oath, which is a weapon that turns the act of a casting into a bloodletting ritual. Whenever you spend life instead of mana, your spells not only deal increased bleed damage, but they leave behind a lingering hemorrhage effect that stacks higher than anything that you can achieve with a conventional bleed setup. Without the staff, the build feels incomplete, but once you get it, the entire playstyle transforms. Your health pool will become your resource and your weapon. Pair this with a keystone called Hemorrhage Flow, which amplifies the bleed duration and scaling based on the missing life. And suddenly, being half dead actually will boost your performance. What makes the Blood Mage so unique is how he walks the razor's edge between the self-destruction and overwhelming offense. You are constantly trading your own life away, but in return, your screen floods with pulsing crimson damage over time effects that chew through even the tankiest bosses. And this isn't a glass cannon build either, it's a bleeding engine that thrives in chaos. And remember, if you want to check this build, look up the best items, the skill trees and power of building, then check my link in the description. And before we continue, thanks to U4GM. They are a pro website that provides POE2 services like cheap currency, then even to trade all types of quality items and gems and much more. They have also more than 20,000 positive comments on Trustpilot, and this website is really worth a try. So make sure to use my discount code KAID for extra 6% off. So let's take a look at the core of our build, which is the skill gems. At the center is the Blood Surge, which is our main bleeding skill. The Blood Surge is a channeling spell that consumes your life in a steady pulse, while stacking devastating bleed effects on every enemy caught in its wave. It's your bread and butter, and you want to roll it on packs, on bosses and anything that dares to step near you. The Blood Surge will scale with both the spell power and the physical bleed multipliers, which makes it a dream build around. Next we got the Crimson Chains, which is a tether spell that lashes enemies together with the veins of the blood. Anytime you inflict bleed on the enemy, the chains will replace it across the entire group. This is where mapping gets wild. You lock down a pack, bleed one target, and instantly the whole group is hemorrhaging, as if they got caught in the same cut. The Crimson Chains also will give us insane clear speed, because the more monsters you group up, the more bleed it spreads. And then for sustain and survivability, we're leaning heavily onto the Blood Offering. This ritualistic spell sacrifices a chunk of your life, but in return it grants you a massive damage boost, the bleed duration and the spell damage for a short window. And the best thing is that if Blood Offering kills any bleeding enemies, then you instantly recover a portion of the life you spent. It basically turns this mechanic into a self-fueling engine that keeps your cycle of casting alive. And then defensively, the core tools are the Bone Ward and the Camouflage Armor. Bone Ward is a barrier spell that absorbs a percentage of incoming physical hits by hardening your blood into the Skeletal Armor. And then Camouflage Armor is more thematic. It thickens your skin with a coolated blood by scaling directly with the amount of bleed damage you inflicted recently. The more enemies bleed, the harder you are to kill. And on top of that, utility gems like the Sanguine Dash will give us mobility, while synergizing perfectly with the bleed triggers. Every time you dash, you leave behind a trail of spattered blood that bleeds enemies who touch it. And then for bosses, you keep a Sanguinate Totem in your pocket. When you drop this totem, it echoes your bleed spells automatically by stacking additional hemorrhage effects while you focus on dodging mechanics. All of this comes together in a gem setup that feels more like a blood ritual than a normal rotation. So you're constantly juggling life, bleeding the room, and constantly being on the edge between insane power and dying. Next up we have our skill tree. The first cornerstone is the Hemorrhage Flow, which is a keystone that defines our damage scaling. It converts the missing life into the bleed duration and damage. What this means is that the lower you sit on your life pool, the more powerful your spells become. It rewards this risky playstyle between being low HP and unleashing insane amount of damage numbers. From there we invest into the three key paths. The first is life scaling. You want as much as maximum life as possible, not only for survivability, but because your life pool doubles as your mana pool and damage amplifier. Every cluster that gives you increased life regen and the life recovery from the spells is mandatory. Then the second path is the bleed and physical scaling. Nodes that increase physical damage over time, bleed duration, and bleeding effectiveness are your bread and butter. Unlike crit or elemental builds that chase multipliers, this path is all about stacking consistency and inevitability. Every cast you make will leave an enemy rotting, and those bleeds will keep ramping. Then the third path is defensive sustain and recovery. You'll want clusters that boost life leech, life on a kill and recovery rate. This ensures that the self-harm aspect of the casting will not spiral out of control. The Blood Mage thrives when it constantly trades life away and instantly regenerates it through the damage. By the time that your tree is complete, you will feel unkillable as long as you're casting, and enemies become your lifeline. Then next we got our Ascendancy choices. For class we have Witch, and for Ascendancy we have the Blood Mage. Then our first Ascendancy point is the Blood Covenant, and it is the single most important one. It allows you to spend life instead of mana to cast spells, and it boosts the damage while you're missing life. This is the foundation of everything, because you cannot be a true Blood Mage without it. Then second is the Scarlet Ritual, which increases the bleed stacking, lets multiple hemorrhage effects overlap, and adds a chance for your bleeds to explode enemies on death in a glorious splash of glory. This is your clear speed powerhouse. Then third we want to go into the Crimson Fortitude, which is a survivability focused Ascendancy that converts a percentage of the bleed damage dealt into the life regeneration. This completely changes the flow of the combat, letting you stay at that dangerous missing life threshold without dropping dead to chip damage. And finally we round this out with the Eternal Sanguine, which is a node that gives you permanent uptime on the Blood Offering, doubles the effectiveness of the life recovery from the bleeding enemies, and even lets you outclass even the nastiest boss mechanics. Once you've reached this point, then the build feels complete, as at that point it becomes a fully functional blood ritual machine. Then next, when it comes to the Atlas tree, the psychology here is straightforward: maximize density and maximize bosses. On the left side we invest into Essence and Harvest, because both will provide reliable crafting bases for the bleed gear. Essence especially is fantastic, as it lets you lock in physical damage over time modifiers early on. Then on the right you focus on the strong boxes, all of which will boost the map density to insane levels. More monsters mean more things to bleed, and more bleeding enemies means more sustain and more power. The build thrives in chaos, so you want as many enemies on your screen as possible. Then at the top pick the bossing notables for the Maven Invocation and Elder Conqueror Influence. The Blood Mage handles prolonged fights exceptionally well. You don't burst, you grind them down, and this Atlas setup will ensure that you're always progressing through the pinnacle content. The key is to avoid scattering points everywhere. Cluster your notables, so you're always feeding into the bleed friendly content that keeps our bleed gameplay rolling. Next up we have gear. Your absolute best in slot is the Sanguine Oath, which is a staff that enables the build. Nothing compares to it. It turns your self damage into scaling bleed multipliers, and adds the signature hemorrhage effect. A corrupted version with a +1 to all spell gems is the dream scenario. Then for your helmet, the Veil of the Red Hunger is the go-to. It increases the bleed duration while also granting you life regen per bleeding enemy nearby. In dense maps this essentially makes you immortal. Then chest armor should be a high life, high armor base with resistances. If you can roll increased life as extra energy shield, then it's even better, as it adds another buffer for your self damage cycle. Then for gloves you want percentage increased physical damage over time, and plus levels of sacred bleed gems. Then for boots you should prioritize movement speed, life, and the bleed immunity corruption if possible. Then your amulet base should be the Bloodstone amulet, which inherently boosts the bleed scaling. Look for life, damage over time multipliers, and ideally a corruption that adds bleed deals damage faster. Then rings fill in resistances and life, but the dream mod is the bleeding you inflict deals damage faster. This single thing can drastically improve our boss DPS. Bell should be heavy leather with a flat life, bleed scaling, and the flask effectiveness. And don't forget about annoyance. On a budget, grab the Hemorrhage for consistent bleed scaling, but if you got more currency, then Sanguinary Pact will give you insane offense and sustain. And for pure damage, Exsanguination is the capstone anointment. And now finally, let's see how to actually play this build. Your rotation begins with the Crimson Chains. Lash enemies together so that every bleed will spread. Then channel the Blood Surge to stack Hemorrhage on everything in a sight. Grab the Exsanguinate totem on the bosses or tough rares, so it echoes your casts and doubles your bleed application. Then keep the Blood Offering rolling on a cooldown, because it's your sustain and the damage steroid. Then defensively, combine the Bone Ward and the Hemoflesh armor. These will give you the breathing room to stay in range and keep channeling. Use Sanguine Dash both for mobility and to leave behind the blood trails that push enemies chasing you. And then when mapping, the playstyle feels super chaotic and simple. You dash into the packs, chain them together, bleed one, and watch the whole group melt in seconds. Every explosion from the Scarlet Ritual will feel satisfying, and the sustain loop of killing bleeding enemies will mean that your life pool refills faster as you spend it. Against bosses, it's all about patience. You can't one-shot them instantly, but you suffocate them under the endless bleeds. The longer the fight goes on, the stronger you become, because Eternal Sanguine will guarantee sustain, and the hemorrhage flow will turn your missing life into the bonus damage.